This is the revision session for Eric Birling from An Inspector Calls. So to start off with, let's have a think about the overview of Eric's character. So the first couple of slides will be all about looking at him as a character, what we know about him, and revising those key aspects. So we know Eric Birling is the son of Mr. and Mrs. Birling. He's weak and he's sometimes reckless, and we know that he has, from the start, a drink problem. Unlike his parents though, however, as the play develops, we know that he has a strong social conscience and he goes through quite a severe change. So have a look on the screen then. There are a few key words to describe him, particularly from the beginning of the play. Awkward, insecure, overlooked, immature, thoughtless, selfish, a drunkard and a thief. What I'd like you to do at this point of the revision is have a think about how your opinion is of Eric at the start of the play, and then as we go through this revision session and as you go through your own personal revision, how your opinion changes of him by the end of Act 3. Then think about how an audience at that particular time would have felt about Eric. You can also think about a contemporary audience as well watching the play. Do we still view him in the same way as we do at the start of Act 1 by the time we get to the end of Act 3? And then I want you to think about the words that you could add to this list. The words that you can add to the list at the end of the play. So moving on then, let's think about an overview of his character. So unlike his sister Sheila, Eric at the start of the play is presented and in performance is awkward. So if we look at the stage directions here quoted on the screen, he's not quite at ease, half shy, half assertive. So let's have a think about how Priestley describes him here, half shy and half assertive. So he seems to have a split in his character traits, and we definitely see this shyness in the beginning of the play. And think about how by the end we get to this revision session, how we see that assertiveness come out against particularly his parents as he begins to stand up for himself later on in the play. So he doesn't seem to have his father's affection or approval. He's definitely kept out of the conversation surrounding his father, Mr. Birling's knighthood. When he really needs his father's help and he gets himself into trouble with Eva Smith, and we know that he's acted very immaturely there, he feels like he can't go to his father. And this is the quote there on the screen taken from Act 3. Because you're not the kind of father a chap could go to when he's in trouble. We know then that he drinks too much. One of the significant things we learn is that he forces his way into a girl's home that he's met at the Palace Bar. This girl becomes pregnant, and then he feels he needs to steal money from his father's business to support her when he learns that she doesn't have a job or money. We know that he has a strong sense of guilt, and he understands that he's responsible for his part in Eva Smith's death as the inspector uncovers this stage by stage throughout the play. So we know that by the end then, Eric has learned a very hard lesson. He's sincerely ashamed of his behaviour, and we believe by the end he's capable of changing for the better. So we've got to consider then that there's more to Eric's character than we will discover. We'll look at this chronologically and how he's presented in Act 1, starting with those stage directions I've already mentioned, all the way through to Act 2 in his absence, and then where he's heavily involved in the play in Act 3. So we've discussed so far that, like Sheila, he feels sympathy for Eva Smith as soon as he hears how Mr. Birling sacked her from his business. When in Act 3, he admits how he behaved towards her, Eva Smith, and the actions he carried out himself, we see that strong sense of guilt, and he understands the consequences of what he did are so much worse than some of the other characters. He shows immaturity, definitely at the start, in his attitude towards the girl. He doesn't take things seriously. He shows that he feels that he can use girls for his benefit. And it appears here that he's learnt little from his privileged education. Priestley perhaps is commenting on the middle and the upper classes here. We see that his rudeness to his parents increases the more he drinks. He begins to shout at them. But could we look at this at his assertiveness growing throughout the play, and actually he gains confidence to stand up for things he believes in and actually say them out loud and defend his point of view? But let's not forget that he's one of the younger people, one of the younger generation. He seems to be changed by the inspector, as does Sheila, and he wants his parents to admit their mistakes too. So, if we start chronologically then, starting with Act 1, the first time we meet Eric, in the stage directions I've mentioned previously, this is how he's described. Think about how this has an impact on us, how the audience would see him, and how you've read this in class. So he's not quite at ease. Think about how we can explode this quotation and think about what this suggests. If you're not quite at ease within yourself, would that suggest that he's uncomfortable? Or is he uncomfortable within the situation? He doesn't feel quite at ease within his family. Half shy, so perhaps a little embarrassed, doesn't speak up for himself. Half assertive. So think about that word assertive, taking control. Then, as the conversation around the Sheila and Gerald's engagement is taking place, he suddenly guffaws and his parents look at him. So he suddenly makes kind of a half laughing noise, which interrupts the conversation, and that prompts Sheila to say, "You're squiffy," which is a word we would look at now at calling somebody drunk or tipsy. Another suggestion there, another hint that Sheila and Gerald are aware perhaps of Eric's drinking problem at this stage, but maybe that his parents aren't because they seem to be teasing him about it. Later on in this scene then, Eric is speaking to his father, Mr. Birling, and he comments on his father always making speeches, as we know Mr. Birling likes to do. Priestley sets this up in Act 1 in particular. And Eric, interestingly, in the stage direction, is presented here as not too rudely. So he's saying something to his father, but he's still doing it in a very respectful way. He's kind of that boundary of being half assertive. And in this quotation here, I think that proves that he's not quite at this stage of the play ready to stand up to his parents. So he says to his father, "Well, don't do any." And he's referring to speeches there. He doesn't want his father to make a big speech. He says, "We'll drink to their health and have done with it." And Priestley here again hinting perhaps at another opportunity that Eric wants to drink in perhaps a situation that he doesn't feel necessarily fully comfortable in. If we move on to Act 2, I've got a few quotations on the screen here between Birling and Mrs. Birling. Sheila comes in towards the end of this particularly long scene. If we think about the inspector's investigation has been building up from Mr. Birling to Sheila, and then obviously we go through all the way through here to Gerald and then Eric. Birling says, "It must have been Eric we heard go out then." Mrs. Birling responds, "Silly boy, where can he have gone to?" "I can't imagine, but he was in one of his excitable, queer moods." So Birling and Mrs. Birling here are discussing Eric, and obviously this gives us, again, using that word hints, we're inferring here, aren't we? We're reading between the lines, Eric's reputation within the family and how they view him. It certainly comes across that they are thinking of him as an excitable, quite immature man. Mrs. Birling says, "I'll tell you what I told her. Go look for the father of the child. It's his responsibility." So we're aware now in the audience and as a reader that Eric isn't in the house at this time, but the inspector is carrying on this investigation. And it's quite clear in Mrs. Birling's discussion and the questions he's asking her that he's trying to get her to think about and reveal the father of Eva Smith, Daisy Renton's child. As an audience, we start to click that Eric might have some involvement here. And it's Sheila, and we can see here in the stage directions with sudden alarm. So she obviously realises here and shouts, "Mother, stop, stop." Look at the use of punctuation there. Look at the use of the exclamatory short sentence by Priestley. Sheila has realised, as do we at this point, that it must be Eric who is the father of this child, and Mrs. Birling is the one that's pushing the inspector to say, go look for the father of the child, it's his responsibility. So it dawns on us now that this must be Eric. This leads us then through into Act 3. If we look at the stage directions at the start of Act 3, exactly as at the end of Act 2, Eric is standing just inside the room and the others are staring at him. So we open Act 3, think about the structure and the form of the play, with the audience knowing, with the characters on stage knowing, potentially Eric's involvement. Eric says, "You know, don't you?" And the inspector replies, as before, "Yes, we know." A lot of the time throughout the play, Priestley gives us clues in his stage directions, lots of adverbs, lots of points where we see the characters' actions, their personality traits, their expressions that can be delivered through this performance. That's a really important thing to discuss when you are analysing these quotations, and particularly the form of the play. Consider the performance and the impact on a contemporary audience and on an audience of that time. Look at that word, adverb, miserably. And then again, another reference to drinking. Eric responds by saying, "Could I have a drink first?" So another hint at his alcoholism and his need to settle his nerves with alcohol. That straight away potentially suggests to us the gravity of this news, of this announcement, especially when everybody knows and he comes into the scene. So the exits and entrances are very important here, particularly Eric being off stage for so much of Act 2 and then coming back into Act 3 to this massive atmosphere that's been unveiled, particularly by Mrs. Birling kind of pointing the finger at the father, unintentionally then for pointing the finger at Eric. Bitterly here we've got the stage direction. I understand a lot of things now. So is this our first clue, our first hint again, that Eric is actually developing and changing as a person, understanding the impact of his actions? Eric says then, "Yes, I insisted, it seems. I'm not very clear about it." So in Act 3, the inspector begins to pick apart Eric's involvement. Eric's involvement here, as we know, of picking up a girl at the Palace Bar and insisting on going back to her room. So it shows another trait in his personality, and again suggests his reliance on alcohol, because it says here, "I'm not very clear about it." So perhaps he was drunk and didn't have his full senses. He also says, "I threatened to make a row," implying his forcefulness here. So threatening to make a row, to make a fuss, shows us that actually he was doing something completely wrong, and also a suggestion that he was forcing this girl. "And I didn't even remember, that's the hellish thing. Oh my God, how stupid it all is." And again, the guilt, the responsibility, how awful Eric feels, presented in this quotation here with the exclamatory sentences, the dashes, the reference of the hellish thing is really important to analyse. "She told me she thought she was going to have a baby." So as the questioning by the inspector unravels this story, we know Eric's involvement. He even says, "No, she didn't want to marry me. She treated me as if I were a kid, though I was nearly as old as she was." And this links us straight back to one of our first words that we had on the second slide, immaturity. We know that he's acting very immaturely here. "So I insisted on giving her money to keep her going until she refused to take any more." So we know he's tried to do the right thing, and perhaps he hasn't gone about it in the wrong way. He's definitely stolen money. Again, the repetition of the stage direction here, miserably. I got it from the office. So he's made lots of poor decisions, but let's interrogate the reasons why. He says here, "Because you're not the kind of father a chap could go to when he's in trouble. That's why." So again, we're exploring the differences between the older and the younger generations and the tensions between the family relationships. We're looking at each part every family member has played in this girl's suicide and in this girl's downfall. But having said that, we can point out all of Eric's flaws, but we can also look to his development. So as we go through further into Act 3, it states again in the stage directions, vitally important for Eric, nearly at breaking point. So if we think about him in Act 1 as being half shy, half assertive, by the time we get to Act 3, he's at breaking point. Then you killed her. So look at the use of the dash, the short, abrupt sentence, how that might be delivered, the voice the performer might put into that, and the projection of that. She came to you to protect me, and you turned her away. Yes, you killed her, and the child she'd have had too. My child, your own grandchild. You killed them both. Damn you, damn you. So previously, when he's talking to his parents, particularly his father, he's trying not to be rude. But here, when he's talking to his mother, and he's talking to his mother about her part in taking responsibility from rejecting her at that charity meeting, very much we get the sense of the anger here. And that stage direction of nearly at breaking point, we most definitely can look at the development of Eric's character, showing that he's been severely impacted by all the things that not only he's done, but the things he's learning from his family as well. So at this point, choose a part of this quotation. This quotation would be too long to remember in the exam, so take a chunk of it, write it out and explode it. Analyse the language that's being used. The punctuation is really important here. You could also think about the performance and how it conveys Eric's change. So we look at Eric and his family and his parents. He says here, but don't forget I'm ashamed of you as well. Yes, both of you. So again, from Act 1, we see him standing up to his parents. Could we argue here he's moved from being half assertive to fully assertive? He's saying his beliefs. He cannot control these emotions. He laughs bitterly in the reaction from his father talking to Mr. Birling to the inspector. I didn't notice you told him that it's every man for himself. So he's referring back to the speeches that Mr. Birling made in Act 1 and how Mr. Birling hasn't given those same speeches to the inspector. And Eric's pointing out that hypocrisy to his father. He then says he was our police inspector, all right. And this quotation you could use showing that Eric believes it doesn't matter whether he or the inspector in fact was real, or perhaps the girl Eva Smith, Daisy Renton, was real, because actually they've learned a lot about themselves, showing the development in his character. So at this point Eric gets to shouting and he says, I say the girl's dead and we all helped to kill her, and that's what matters. So he's taking responsibility for his actions. That doesn't matter to me. The one I knew is dead. Both of these quotations will be really good to learn and use in supporting any type of discussion of the younger generation or Eric as a character, potentially Sheila as well, thinking about how they've moved from the beginning of the play, the use and the role of the inspector, and the change that it's had on them. So there's a few things that you can do now to further support your revision. If we want to look specifically at the older and the younger generations, you could look at Eric and Sheila and create this Venn diagram against the more older generation. So looking at Mr. and Mrs. Birling, and you could look at the similarities and then the differences. How do they change? What is their perspective at the end of the play? There's also an exam style question here and on the next slide that you could begin to plan out. So compare and contrast the older and younger generation in Act 1 and make a plan for this question. You could move on and develop how that changes in Act 3. Here I've put for you an overview of the themes in the play. You could take any one of those themes, pick from that list, and you could pop it into this essay style question. You could then plan and have a go at answering that essay and consider exploring within your essay the characters, the language that Priestley uses, the ideas and themes that come through, and of course the contextual influences. And throughout all of this, remember to be thinking about the what, the how, and the why.